Hello everybody, welcome back to Dr. Hanadana and Linguistics channel. As I promised you at the end of last session, today I'll be talking about dynamic situations. But before we start, I think it's worth reminding ourselves of the main issues we discussed last time. As we can see, we had a look at this figure in front of us, which illustrates the two different types of situations. We said that there are two different types of situations: static situations and dynamic ones. And we also said that the static situations are portrayed by using stative adjectives and or stative verbs. And we said that those stative verbs can also be used in a non-stative manner with a slight difference in meaning. And we said that dynamic situations are portrayed by using dynamic verbs, which is the topic of today's session. Dynamic situations. Dynamic situations involve changing in the state, and dynamic situations are usually portrayed by using dynamic verbs. The example that we have in front of us, John planted these trees, illustrates the idea. John planted these trees. The verb plant here is actually used to portray a dynamic situation. I study English. I usually drive to college, and he built a big house are such similar examples. They all include dynamic verbs, plant, study, drive, and build, that are used to portray dynamic situations. Types of dynamic situations. There are two different types of dynamic situations. Events, where the speaker views the situation as a whole, as in he blinked when he saw her. The verb blink is used here to portray the situation as a whole. And the second type is processes, where the speaker views the internal structure of a dynamic situation, as in I drove to college. The verb drive here is used to portray the internal structure of the situation. It is used to portray the situation as a process. Now, we have just said that dynamic situations are of two types, events and processes. Now, processes are of two types as well. Processes can be inchoative, where our attention is directed to the beginning of a new state or to a change of a state, to the beginning of the process, as in the candle melted. In such a sentence, the verb requires one argument only, and such a verb is also called inchoative verb. The second type of processes is resultatives, where our attention is directed to the end of the process, as in, for example, I painted my room. Paint is also called a resultative verb. Having it in a sentence like this draws our attention to the result of the situation. Such verbs usually require two arguments. Dynamic verbs. Verbs such as plant, study, blink, drive, melt, and paint are referred to as dynamic verbs. And dynamic verbs can also be classified into different types based on semantic distinctions. Such classification underlies the different dynamic situations introduced so far. These types of dynamic verbs are genitive verbs versus punctual verbs, and telic versus atelic verbs. This is actually the topic for the coming session, for our coming session. That's all for today. For those who are interested, the only reference that I have just used for today's session is the one in front of us, John Said's book. That's all for today. Thank you very much for listening. See you real soon. Stay healthy, stay safe.